Thank you all so much for being here this evening. So just a quick review. So you are welcome to use the Q&A function or the chat to share information. We'll have a couple of times where we're hoping everyone can participate in chat discussion. We are recording this, and then we will send a link for the evaluation, for an evaluation, so we can learn more about your thoughts and how to continue to improve these before our final family seminar.
Yeah, and also, again, the transcript is on, so you should all have access to that as well. I'm sorry, Michelle, we can't see you.
But yes, I'm Michelle. I'm a clinical psychologist at the NYU Child Study Center, and I also serve as a social emotional consultant for the NEST program. So working with social workers, guidance counselors, and supporting school teams and supporting the social emotional needs of students.
First of all, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Like I said, this is the last workshop, and it's so special. I feel really happy to spend this last one with the families. My name is Yalda. It is spelled Y-A-L-D-A. I am a support specialist and instructional consultant at the ASD NEST project. And yeah, Michelle and I work together a lot, and we're really happy today to talk about co-regulation with you.
So again, just a quick refresher reminder. So really the role of these groups is to provide social emotional support, both for our children and then also for ourselves as caregivers, to build family to family advice and community building. And then again, we always do want to ground it in some home-based strategies specific to autism. And tonight we'll be focusing on co-regulation in particular. So the goals of today is, so we'll introduce the idea of co-regulation. We'll provide examples of what co-regulation looks like in the NEST program, and then think through some strategies for how you might apply this at home. So again, we just want to acknowledge kind of our group norms and what we're all going to agree to this evening. So really focusing on intention versus impact, acknowledging that we're all coming from a good and supportive place here. We're going to try to lean into any discomfort that can come up together and be open to hearing feedback from each other. Okay, so again, we'll start with a quick grounding. We'll talk about co-regulation at school and at home, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So we want to start by just helping everyone find some common ground. So I just want everyone to take a minute, don't press send just yet, but to type in the chat one thing you're looking forward to for winter break. So I'll give everyone a minute just to type in the chat one thing they're looking forward to. And then when I say go, we'll press enter and we'll see everyone's responses come into the chat at once. So go ahead and press enter, and we should be able to see what are people looking forward to through winter break. So I see one response, Yalda. I don't know if you see some other responses coming in of what people are looking forward to.
Oh yeah, I can see a lot of responses about sleeping in. Can you see them? One, Mandy says not having a schedule, which is which is really funny. And celebrating with family, having a break, more sleep and unstructured time, rest, visiting family, Christmas, cookies and presents. I said mulled wine, what I'm looking forward to. I'm seeing more rest. Yeah, that's really nice.
So important.
And Michelle, can you see the chat?
No.
Okay. I'll read them.
Fabulous. Oh, let me see.
So for further grounding, we thought to do a little mindfulness activity. I don't know if you have a glass of water around you, but this is also just something to think of next time that you are drinking water, to take a slow sip of cool water and concentrate on the feeling as it goes down your throat. How did that work?
I was doing some back channel problem solving, but we're good now. We're ready. So I could definitely use some mindfulness and grounding right now that I've worked through my technical challenges.
Well, do you have some water?
I do. All right. Okay, so I think we wanted to do a quick poll.
Right. Should I launch it? I already have it.
Yes. So we really just wanted to start, this term co-regulation is something we talk about a lot and talk about in the NEST program, but just to get a sense for this group of how familiar you are with the term co-regulation. So y'all just going to launch a quick poll and you should be able to just answer, click one of the 4 options. Okay, so I see a mix.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And it's looking like for the majority, this is new, which I think is a great place to start. I also think as we talk about it, you may realize that you are doing this already. So it'll be nice to listen to this idea and connect to things that you are already doing at home.
Okay.
So what is co-regulation? Really? So the idea behind this is that before an individual, it says child here, but I'm going to say individual because I think this happens across, and Yald and I will talk about, like, we need co-regulation as adults also. This doesn't end at a particular age. But that really the idea is to regulate our own emotions and body. We really need to learn how, and we really need support. And many of our NEST students in particular need support in teaching awareness of emotions and feelings. And the key here, part of co-regulation, is that the person who is helping co-regulate is modeling the regulation for them before the person can do it themselves. And so I love this graphic. When their storm meets our calm, right, co-regulation occurs. So when we're able to provide that calming presence, modeling that coping, it's really, really powerful. And y'all and I were, when you were making this presentation, we're talking about how, we continue to have moments in our lives when, whether it's a family member or a partner, like, can provide that grounding regulation for us when we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, that having that calming presence, having someone to say, you know what, I'm just going to sit here next to you on the couch, is really grounding and helpful. And so tonight we're really going to focus on what you can do as caregivers in supporting children or students who may become dysregulated, how you can be that grounding and co-regulating presence for them.
Yeah, and I think like that is again so important to just remind ourselves that this is something across developmental stages, because a lot of the times the very widely held belief is that there is like a certain age between this age to this age, lower elementary students, but it's really, as adults, we also need co-regulation in our lives. So the why of it really, just like Michelle said, what is co-regulation is basically an external support system that can walk an individual through a time of overwhelm and just be the support there. But the why of it is really is not just to bring a person to feel calm, and that is definitely important, but the goal of it is really that we want to help our kids to recognize those signals in their bodies that is causing them to feel dysregulated. So it is beyond just feeling calm and moving on, and it's just that we want to co-regulate to through that, help them first of all recognize those signals, and then start decoding them. What do they mean and where are they coming from? Because a lot of times challenging behaviors may look the same, but the cause of it may not be the same. And so really recognizing those signals and trying to decode them. And so once they start recognizing and learning to decode their bodily signals, then they can have access to regulation strategies that really meet their needs. And by this, again, it can look very different for different people. It's not really one size fits all, and we will talk more about this. I took this visual straight from the guide of the Nest Support Project, because it is just a really good way to remind us how important it is to feel regulated and our senses to feel regulated. So it's kind of like thinking of our sensory system to be the track itself, and all the other supports that we do while in schools. And obviously we're going to talk today about home strategies, but the social supports or the behavior supports or the instructional supports are all coming and basically being accessed when our sensory needs and our central nervous system is regulated. This is a little clip that is from a podcast that is an interview with a self-advocate, Rachel Dorsey, who you might know. She's an advocate. She's a well-known advocate, a speech therapist, and she talks about co-regulation and how she does that in her practice. So we took a little bit of that conversation that I'm gonna play, but also I just want to say here, there's a little glitch in the middle of it, so don't think that it's your internet.
In situations where like I'm not sure what exactly what like the why is something that I'll reflect on later, but in the moment the best thing that I can do is co-regulate with the student, because I know that is the thing that's needed. Like we're like no demands. Co-regulate could mean different things to different students. It could mean, being kind of near them and, like holding arms out. It could mean getting to the other side of the room and just sort of me drawing on paper, doing my own thing. And the student is able to, without me being directly next to them, kind of get some space. And I think really, really ethically, as far as like supporting our students' mental health, particularly autistic students who face a lot of traumas pretty regularly. being that person that's willing to kind of put what we were going to do on hold and just like have a session of co-regulation. May seem like atypical, may seem like not a skilled service, but it is, because you're assessing what the student needs, and that is what they need, and you're giving them what they need. And
yeah, so I think it's really important to kind of start from knowing that it is a skill. It's a skill to have to co-regulate.
So we actually wanted to start because I think, you know, part of this, right, is what we're asking caregivers to do, and what Rachel Dorsey was just talking about is like to be that calming presence and remain calm ourselves in the midst of a child that we're supporting having a difficult time or escalating. And so when we talk about regulation, what we wanted to start with and have everyone share out in the chat is what have you found as regulating for yourself, which may or may not be similar to your child, and we'll talk about that. But I think that's always a helpful place to start, is what techniques do you find regulating when you are feeling a moment of distress or stress or frustration? Slower breathing. I see that. Absolutely. Breathing or a calming mantra. Yep. Having that language, having that phrase, taking a walk, taking breaks. Yep. Walking away. Yeah, I think that's such a powerful one. Okay. So, stretching. Yep. I think stretching kind of helps regulate your body. A lot of times we're carrying a lot of tension that we don't realize until we deliberately relax our muscles.
Absolutely. I can share mine. I listen to calming music.
Oh, I like my partner intervenes and I walk away. Yes. And I think that's we're going to talk about that, like drawing on your support system, right? So like, and like we're regulating through calling on help, through stepping out. Absolutely.
It's interesting because calling for help is in a way that your partner is now co-regulating with you.
Yes. Exactly. Oh, listing things I like about people. So that's a really, thank you, Jessica, for sharing. Like, that's a really nice reframe, right? Sometimes we're trying to change how we're thinking. And maybe if we're in a moment of, you know, thinking about what are the things, what can I focus on? Fidgeting, moving, absolutely. That's something I definitely regulate through fidgeting. Like playing with hair ties, having a pen in my hand, really can help my body feel calm. Classical music for the kids to listen to. Yep. So that might be something that regulates you and might be regulating for your child as well. Yep, exactly. Both and all. Yep. And so thank you all for sharing out these strategies. Again, the idea here is one, to be thinking about, you know, what is helpful for you, for yourself in these moments. And then also to start thinking about what are things I might be able to model for my child if I'm building this skill, you know, in the moment. You know, you heard Rachel talk about, now she's talking about therapy, but I think it's similar context, right? We're stepping away from the why, we're stepping away from the problem solving and maybe doing something that can help be regulating for the person with us. So she talked about how she might go draw in the corner, she might sit near them, right? So we can start to think about what are some things that we can do as caregivers that can bring that regulation into the room.
Yeah. And of course, when we are ourselves already regulated.
Yes. Yeah, we cannot co-regulate.
And we're not.
Or we cannot co-regulate unless we're self-regulated, right? And so I did want to just highlight a couple of things about supporting our own regulation as caregivers broadly. You know, again, I think this is an expression that is used often, and I know it is cliche, but I really like to use it because I really truly believe it. This idea of putting on your own oxygen mask first. So if you are trying to help in a moment, I love that some parents or some caregivers on the call said, I might need to walk away for a minute. I might need to regroup, right? So having that self check-in, right? So think about, where am I at right now as I'm either going into a situation that might potentially be dysregulating. Sometimes I think about this idea of, how do we build up our coping reserves? So I think about like our emotional reserves, kind of like a battery, right? So we might start the day and we're able to cope with all sorts of things that go wrong, right? Like the train's 5 minutes late. Okay, no problem. Like my coffee order, is not exactly right. Okay, but it might drain over the end of the day, right? By the end of the day, if that train is late, your ability to cope with that is much, much diminished, right? And I think the same thing is true oftentimes for our nest students, that they're working so hard throughout the day to regulate, and sometimes those reserves can also be depleted. And so thinking about, for each of you individually, and there's no right or wrong answer here, what's going to build back up those coping reserves? Is it having breaks throughout the day? Is it calling a friend? Is it making sure that I have 30 seconds in the morning to have a sip of coffee before I start kind of on to my next thing? So how do we kind of recharge that coping battery? I think you all already mentioned drawing on your supports and thinking about strengths. So if you're sharing caregiving responsibilities, maybe thinking strategically about, okay, who's going to take the mornings and who's going to take, this part of the evening routine. Or maybe someone, really does well remaining calm during that transition time off of electronics. And for the other parent, they're just coming, the other caregiver is coming home after a really long day, and that's not the time for them to be kind of leading that, right? So kind of communicating with one another and thinking about that. And then also this coping ahead. So this idea of, if we know a challenging situation is coming, just like we coach our kids to think about what can we do in this situation, thinking about who can I draw on in this moment, what's going to be helpful for me in this moment. And again, because you all already touched on this with reframing, there's so many wonderful everyone on this call is an expert, but thinking about how can we shift our thinking in the moment. And I'm going to give one example on the next slide, but I think that what can happen, is when we see someone we care for having a really difficult emotional time, can bring up a lot of thoughts for ourselves. And a lot of those thoughts can be pretty negative or self-blaming, right? And they're all valid. And sometimes it's catching, how am I talking to myself in this moment? And are there ways to reframe? And this is from a parenting blog. And I'll just share it with you as an example. When your child is having a meltdown, they're doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing. They are feeling emotions, and that's a healthy thing. And they are telling you, I feel safe enough with you to let my guard down. So you can imagine how you might feel. And again, this is one example, thinking about what's happening for the child in this way and replacing potentially some of that self-blame, frustrated, thinking about the future language that might be coming up that might make it harder for you to regulate in that moment.
So this is a self-advocacy ladder, which is obviously our ultimate goal for an individual to be able to self-advocate for what they need. But so as we see here, it starts from highlighting and collaborating. And that means asking the question, what will you do or say to model and highlight their needs and signs they need something? So this is kind of like the start of co-regulating, right? Again, to give those signals of body, what they mean and how to decode them. And then it goes into developing that self-awareness. So what will they recognize for themselves? Identifying tools is the third one, which is what strategy or tool will you teach them to get their need met? But it's really important to sort of unpack here that the moment that a person is dysregulated is not a moment to teach anything. So really this part of the ladder towards self-advocacy is not about the co-regulation. It's just talking about identifying those tools at other times. And we are just going to basically facilitate access to those tools during co-regulation, but we're not teaching them in that moment. And then it goes to developing self-regulation. So what will they do when they recognize their need and are prompted? So this prompt, again, is co-regulation, or primed to utilize a strategy or tool. And eventually, what will they do independently or ask for to get their need met? So we thought, just like we mentioned in the agenda, to first start with just getting into like what it looks like in a nest classroom, and what the teachers and practitioners are doing when they are co-regulating with students, and then we'll talk about home strategies, right? Okay, so this is to say that I'm going to go over these steps, but let's for a moment look at this visual on the right-hand side of the page, because it's so important to, first of all, create a structure and an environment that makes safety possible, as well as having that relationship. So we always talk about this with the teaching teams, that how are we creating that group identity, and how are we making these relationships that students can actually feel safe, so that we can start co-regulating, right? And then this all comes together with then teaching and coaching self-regulation skills. And so the steps basically goes as in, first, starting to validate someone who's feeling overwhelmed, however they might be feeling when they're dysregulated. So validating those feelings and starting to label those feelings to bring awareness. And we're going to talk about examples of each in a second, but labeling feelings is not just saying what the feeling is, but also talking about how physically it might feel. So like feeling angry might feel how. Then going into modeling and scaffolding self-regulation skills, again, the tools that have already been taught at other times when we are calm. And so then modeling them during the time of dysregulation for a person. We have here narrowing information streams, because that's also very, very important. We're not going to add to someone's overwhelm. And offering choices and visual supports, which is, again, helps with that narrowing down of information input. Instead of verbally keep talking to someone who is feeling overwhelmed and need to process even more, we can offer choices that are available within that structured environment, and visual supports of what they can use. For instance, if we have worked on certain self-regulation skills, then a visual of it and gesturally pointing to that visual might be enough, instead of verbally talking about it in that time. And obviously giving space. So let's look at some of the examples of how these might look like. This is just quickly, I'm going to go over it. So co-regulating moves, setting the scene, using lighting as a cue, maybe dimming the light to bring energy down, matching volume and tone, checking your physical presence, using reflective language, like saying, naming the emotions that students express as a way to show that you are listening and you are seeing them. Again, the presence, we are here for you. And lastly, we have here prompting strategies and choices. Like I said before, this is just to summarize those points. And so the first one was validation, right? So let's look at some of the examples of what validation means and then what it doesn't mean. So I hear that this is very hard for you, versus saying, this cannot be hard, you're so smart. Or I hear you, there were a lot of changes and you feel overwhelmed. Instead of saying, come on, this is not a big deal, it is only a small change in the schedule. I understand that you are confused and unsure of what to do. Oh, you know what to do. So those differences. And lastly, I can see that it is too loud here for you versus saying it's not loud here at all. Stop being so dramatic. Then we talk about labeling, right? But it's not just labeling feelings. So these are the feelings, but what might they feel like? So if I'm saying that I feel worried or frustrated, then we can also talk about what that might feel like. Muscles are tense. My voice, I feel that my voice is getting louder. I feel more fidgety and restless. I might be nervous. So really trying to cue those signals of what it feels like. And it's so important again to say here that sometimes the body cues of different individuals feels differently. So it's not always the same, like feeling nervous and feeling angry and feeling excited might not physically look the same for everyone. But again, it's just important to point them out anyway. And then it goes into giving choices and using visual supports, right? And here we have some examples of like this. The first one is a board in the hallway, right? Need a break, check in. Here are your options for cooling down. The student already knows what to do. They've practiced it before, and the visual is just there as a co-regulator, as help. Or the options for movement. And this is school-wide because it's in, this board is in the hallway. Or there is a sensory board where student knows how to use when they're to feel calm. And there is break areas. They are very important. Just knowing that they're there is important. Sometimes we really emphasize on this, that having a break area. These are some other examples of break areas, one in high school and one in elementary school. But just because our kids don't use them in a class doesn't mean that we should take it away, because sometimes just knowing that it's there, it's validating, and it already helps us feel safe in that environment. So we thought to ask in the chat, if you can drop in the chat, how are you already applying some of these, maybe not these co-regulation strategies, maybe yes, other co-regulation strategies at home?
So ways you've set up the environment at home to be regulating, things you do in moments when you see that your child or the child that you're caring for becoming more frustrated. Because I think as we give these examples, even though the term may be new, I imagine that everyone is doing these kinds of things at home. So we'll give everyone a few minutes to think. Yep, so I see some awesome examples already. Yes, matching tone, getting on the same eye level. Yes, I think getting on the child's level is so important, because it really creates this like sense of like equality and validation, and is very grounding. Maintaining
says, yeah, maintaining. Sorry, it just like made me like so happy to
yes.
hear that. We talked a lot about routines in our last session, and
Yes.
that is so key.
Repeating back what the frustration is, so validating, right? Because what you're saying is, I hear you. And I think it's so important, because what I always say is everyone on this call is probably a really good problem solver, and we can hear what a child is frustrated about, and our brains can immediately go to, this is how we could solve this problem, or this is the encouragement I could give. And taking that beat to say, like, I hear what's frustrating you is so powerful. Yep. Asking for a hug, hugs in a calm voice. Yep. So kind of that physical co-regulation. Modeling calm behavior, setting up cozy spaces. I think that's great. Getting down to her height. Yep. So a lot of people talking about kind of, bringing your voice down, bringing your tone down, and then physically bringing your body down. Yep. Yep. Oh, a lot of validation happening on this call. That's so wonderful. I think it's such a powerful co-regulating tool.
Yeah, I'm gonna read that. We address feelings in an environment that feels open and space. I offer up my bed as it provides a sense of comfort. Yeah, and like you said, validating feelings.
My daughter uses hugs as a redirection strategy for parents and teachers. Yep.
That's awesome. That's so nice. And I guess like thinking about some other ways of offering co-regulation, like so I have worked with some students that really don't like anyone to get in their space, you know, so like in those moments is a lot of like just giving that validation that you're there, but in a different way. It just might mean that I'm just gonna sit next to you and just know that I'm here.
Yeah, I think the same thing with matching tone. I think sometimes we think about kind of meltdowns or dysregulation is very like, you know, external, right? Like, you know, saying things, crying, tensing, all of which can happen. There are some individuals that when they become dysregulated, it's really more like kind of a withdrawing inwards of like not saying so much, not wanting to speak. And so sometimes we can be really co-regulating in that moment by kind of matching like, okay, what they need is some quiet, right? And some presence, and some kind of verbal space, so to speak, as well. So I think that also comes with like matching, either bringing down your tone or kind of matching where the individual is at.
I love taking a pause too, you know, like when some like dysregulation happened and just modeling, saying like, oh, I am going to pour myself a cup of water now and take a sip of my water. I'm gonna make a cup for you too. If you want, you can take a sip of that, you know, just kind of talking about what works for us and what we've always modeled as well. Okay.
So I just wanted to share this is written by a self-advocate, talking about kind of different ways this can look, and some examples of co-regulation, right? So this is talking about a shutdown as opposed to a meltdown. You can use whatever words resonate the most with you and your children, or the children you're supporting. So autistic shutdown is like an internalized meltdown. Well, this person is experiencing a lot of emotions. They can't express them outwardly. So it could look like zoning out. It could look like hiding, could look like falling asleep. So how can allistic or non-autistic folks help? Safety first. Think about sensory safety, have a quiet space with reduced stimuli. Think about having a sensory kit tailored to their needs, right? So we might co-regulate by making some materials available, whether it's headphones or ear defenders, whether it's something to hold, whether it's a blanket, reducing those expectations and demands. Rachel talked about this, right? Like kind of when we're at that peak, our focus shifts from how can we help re-regulate before we try to move forward, giving space and time. And I think this, again, this reframe is so important. You know, we're not thinking about this as stubbornness or laziness or disrespect. You know, we're thinking about something that may not feel voluntary, right? That is a state of overload that may feel uncomfortable or may feel really tiring for our children. And so again, just a visual to think about, and again, from this self-advocate perspective of what that experience might be like and how powerful co-regulation can be. So I just wanted to highlight this when we think about kind of co-regulation and different strategies around emotion regulation, this idea of the wave, and an idea of like kind of how we can think about kind of escalation and regrouping. So we often think about kind of the first stages of dysregulation as that kind of rumbling phase. So maybe the wave is starting to rise. This is going to look different for every individual, but it can be really helpful if we want to support with co-regulation to start to notice some of these signs. And I think many of you have already identified them, I am sure, whether it's like raising a voice, starting to get tense, maybe throwing, ripping something up, throwing something on the floor, responses changing. This is a time when we can start to maybe prompt a strategy, when we can redirect to a different activity, when we might think about adjusting demands. So maybe, thinking about, okay, is the request I just made, can it be modified in some way to feel more manageable in this moment? Then we can think about sometimes past our rumbling stage, we hit a peak, that wave is cresting, that full emotional overload is happening. This is a time when really we're going to go into full co-regulation mode where we're prompting a lot less. Actually, we're really trying not to prompt very much and really think about, how do we give some space to the individual? How do we reduce input, reducing verbal input, reducing sensory input? We'll talk about some examples of that. And really think about, like, what is this behavior communicating? Like, what is my child communicating to me right now in this moment? Again, as Yalda pointed out at the beginning, but I really want to highlight, this is not a problem-solving time. And again, I think we're all really good problem solvers. And so sometimes when we get to the peak, it makes us even more want to be like, no, like the solution is, if only you would put your shoes on, or we did this, or, you could do this, it would be better. But right now their brain's in overload. We've all, but, we can all think about this time, right? We all think about like a time when you were really upset or really stressed out, and someone very well-intentioned in your life said to you, well, what you could do is, we can't access it, right? So we're going back to that sensory track at the beginning of the talk. We're thinking about how do we help a child re-regulate, and sometimes that really means less is more. Then there's go ahead, Yalda.
I just wanted to add something to what you said, because it reminded me of this belief that a child that's showing challenging behavior needs discipline, and it's the discipline itself is a teachable thing. Like, we discipline a child so that they learn how to discipline themselves. And again, goes back into like thinking about it through this lens of like, through this, when someone's dysregulated, they cannot learn anything. So it doesn't even make sense to discipline in that moment. Just a thought.
Yeah. And then I think there's the regrouping phase. And I say regrouping, so the wave comes down, right? The emotions do come down. And I think it's that, again, that timeline looks different for everybody. But it's a time for everyone to slowly recover. And I think as part of the co-regulation model, we're thinking as much about I'm saying ourselves collectively as like the caregivers or the co-regulators. We might need time to re-regulate, right? Like, we've been working really hard to keep calm, keep it together. We might need a few minutes to kind of, as things get calm. The child certainly may need some time to regroup, to engage in an activity. So we're really going to save the reflection and problem solving until well after that wave has passed. And so I think what's important is that it's not that it's not happening. I think the problem solving, the reflection, the thinking about what could happen next, maybe reflecting on some behaviors that came up during the meltdown, but we're saving it until everyone's in a space where they can access, where we can communicate about it effectively and access that information. So well after that wave has passed. So again, this is just another way it's a visual of the same thing. I think, you can see how the co-regulating could look like in this model, right? So again, we're trying to keep our adult behavior as neutral and minimal as possible as the child is going through this wave. I think this idea of a point of no return is sometimes a helpful frame for, especially if you're sharing caregiving responsibilities, or even for yourself to know, okay, like, I've got to pause the redirection. Like, you know what, like, we've tried some redirection, we've tried some things, we're at that point where the child is going to need to kind of play out this emotional experience. And that can kind of help you prepare yourself. And also maybe if other family members are supporting, to know, okay, we're in this phase where we're not problem solving, we're not redirecting, we're going to be present. We're going to try to give some space, and then you will notice, and it's almost hidden, it's like so far off the screen, but that the teachable moment is not happening at any point during this escalation. So we're thinking about the co-regulation first, and the teachable moment is coming much later, because it's going to be way more effective when everyone is re-regulated. So what does co-regulation look like at home? There's many, many, many different examples. You were already naming a bunch. Routines can be really co-regulating, kind of having that predictability, having that, and again, that's going to look different for different families, but having that things come after another, or there are certain things that are done in a routine way, or following that routine maybe after a difficult moment can also be really co-regulating, like when the wave has landed and everyone's back to baseline, continuing through that routine. Shared activities can be really co-regulating. And I just wanted to highlight like active and passive shared time. And what I mean by that is like active shared time is like we're doing an activity together. Maybe we're collaborating, we're cooking together, we're coloring, we're drawing together, we're, playing a game. That can certainly be regulating. So can passive shared time. And what I mean by passive shared time is like sharing space, watching a movie together. Like everyone's had a long day, we're going to watch a movie together. Maybe I'm drawing over here, you're drawing over there. So there's still that shared time, even if it's not in the context of a structured turn-taking activity, is often very helpful for our kids. Again, going back to that sensory track, thinking about how do we reduce sensory input? Think about, do we need to dim the lights? Do we need to turn off the TV that's playing in the living room? Can we, think about creating a safe space for kids? And then having those sensory supports accessible. So again, as you get to know your child and know what's co-regulating for them, offering or having available a lovey to squeeze, having available a cup of cool water, having available a blanket to wrap themselves up in, offering that hug. I put accessibility here because I think, one thing I want to highlight with co-regulation is that we don't want coping skills to become a power struggle. They shouldn't be, right? If a coping skill is becoming a power struggle, then it has lost all power as a coping. It's no longer regulating. So we can offer, we can have it present, we can model, but we want to avoid, our goal is not to get into a situation where we're saying, you need to take a deep breath, and a child saying, no, I'm not going to take a deep breath. That's their choice, right? But that's where modeling strategies can be really helpful. So instead of placing a demand, we can say, I'm going to take a really deep breath right now. Or maybe you're not even verbalizing, you're sitting quietly, you're holding the stuffy, you're saying, okay, like I'm gonna squeeze and let go. Whatever has worked for you and your child, and maybe things you've practiced together, you can model. Maybe you're gonna turn on, if it's calming to your child, you might turn on some soft music. Again, that's really going to depend on the sensory profile of the child. And again, we're often minimizing verbal input. I think verbalizing and language can feel really overwhelming when you are in that heightened stage. So thinking about, can we kind of soften our voice, soften our volume, and really reducing where we're really focused on the regulation. We're not talking about the behavior. We're not talking about the why of what happened or the problem solving. It's really about, I can see that you are upset, maybe a validation, but trying to reduce that input overall.
Yeah, that's really important. To just try and think of, like, when I see here modeling strategies and minimizing verbal input, like they can also go together, right? Like if it's a breathing strategy of like box breathing, and I'll just do the box breathing, I don't have to talk about it in that moment.
Right.
And thanks to our mirror neurons, that's how we learn.
Again, just to highlight, and I think I could include a version of this slide in every talk that I give, because everyone is so unique, right? So, but for co-regulation is not one size fits all. So different strategies work for different children and caregivers. Some kids can really access deep breathing. That's the example I most often use. Some kids, or caregivers for that matter, they're like, the breathing is not for me, or I have a negative association with it. That's okay. So you really are going to be thinking about like what is going to work for you and your family, in both proactively and then in these moments of where things are feeling heightened. You can think about ways to use different kinds of visual supports. So sometimes the visual support is you modeling the skill. Sometimes the visual support is as concrete as having it available and like within the individual's line of sight. For individuals who are older, or you might have visual supports with some words on them, maybe a picture of what they can do in a moment of escalation, a picture of some choices. Again, really thinking about those sensory needs and what can be re-regulating. So going back to those, 5+ senses, right? Sight, smell, taste, hearing, tactile, and also proprioceptive, like where your body is in space. Like sometimes kids need to be like upside down to be regulated. Sometimes they need to be moving around. And so that can play a part in the co-regulation. But again, really thinking about what's going to work for you and your family. And I appreciate everyone sharing their examples, because I think it really highlights how this can look different for different families. I just wanted to also show an example. I heard that there are a lot of kids who love hugs, which is awesome. For our kids who don't like hugs, I just wanted to show that an example of how this can look different for different families, right? So it might mean staying close. It might just be like in the proximity as a regulating presence. Again, I think it's you staying calm. So you can see this particular caregiver is thinking to themselves, like, breathe, where like you're kind of breathing, you're staying calm, you're kind of not, you're keeping that affect neutral even as the child's affect is going up. Naming the feeling, right? So going back to what Yalda was talking about, labeling, like I see that you're raising your voice. I'm wondering if you're angry. I will say with labeling feelings, sometimes we're wrong, and that's okay. So you might, I like to use like, I'm wondering, or, that you're feeling this way, because sometimes a child might have a slightly different language for it. And that's totally okay. We're opening the door to build that skill of them identifying what's happening for them. And then offering that help when they're ready, right? So what we're modeling with co-regulation is I'm here when you need me. I'm available when you need me. So I just wanted to tie it in, because we started with our connection, right? We've got a break coming up. And so this is a time when co-regulation can definitely be practiced and may be needed. So I think, one thing that can be helpful with is coping ahead and thinking about what are upcoming potential changes for the individual. For me, like, am I going to be cooking dinner for 15 people? I might be a little more stressed. I might need some support with my own regulation. But also thinking about changes for your family, right? You might be traveling somewhere else. The routine might be different. How do we preview that for our kids? Consider maybe what has been helpful or maybe not so helpful in the past, right? Like sometimes we're learning from things and thinking about, okay, what might we shift differently this time around? And then also sharing, if you are going to be around extended family, friends, maybe people who don't interact as frequently with your child on a daily basis, thinking about sharing some strategies with them as well. So like, this is sharing the validation, sharing that we try to create quiet spaces. I really like to think ahead with kids. If you're going to someone else's home or a party where it's going to be loud or there might be a lot of sensory input, identifying what might be a space they can go if they need a regulating moment. Yep, Helen, I try not to schedule too many activities during the break. Downtime is really important. Absolutely, right? You're taking your family's kind of emotional temperature, so to speak, and thinking about what is the level of activity we need and what is the level of downtime that we need. So families may need more co-regulation and attention to this during a break. So and Helen started us off, which is fantastic. Would love to hear from others. What has your family done over breaks that has worked well in the past, given that we have one just around the corner?
I really liked what you said about families may need to, like the other family members may need to know about this too, because that kind of talks to us as we are actually advocating, right? And that's so important. We're a community, and our strategies is not just for me and this other individual, but we want to create that kind of community.
So I see setting screen time expectations early and staying consistent through the break. That's a great one. Again, screen time expectations going to look different for every family, but having that really clear ahead of time can help everybody around that. I see using a countdown calendar until back to school. I think that's a great previewing routine that can really help with that regulation, so we know what's coming.
That's awesome.
Having a schedule and sharing in advance. Yep. So you're kind of helping support that regulation by letting your child know, here's what's coming up, here's what might look different. And again, the visuals can vary. Some kids like a visual for like the whole 2 weeks. Some kids, that's like, whoa, that's way too much information. I need a visual just for like what's happening today on the fridge. And you're going to be the expert in your child. Making a visual schedule and structuring time. Oh, family preparation for meals. Yeah, that's a great one. And I think meals can bring up a lot for our kids, whether it's kind of knowing like what kinds of food there's going to be there. There's different senses. There's different family expectations around how long are you supposed to sit at the table. So kind of preparing for what those might look like or involving the child in prep can be really helpful. A quiet area. Yep. To decompress and chill out. I love that idea of thinking about finding that quiet area. Feeling less guilty about doing what's best for our child and our nuclear family, rather than worrying so much about extended family expectations. Thank you, Marianne. That's such a powerful reframe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thinking about, you know, what is our child and what does our family need right now? So important. I think the only other, I think the one thing I'll add is also thinking about maybe building in some extra regulation time after big events, because holidays are also really exciting and can be really fun. And sometimes like I want to think about like there can also be stimulation that's really happy and exciting and positive and also exhausting, right? Like I certainly, can often feel like really tired after a weekend of being around a lot of people or doing a lot of things. So thinking about as a family, building in, do we need to build in some more downtime or some regulating time for all of us together to know that we're going to be expending a lot of energy on certain days or in certain events.
Mm-hmm.
And again, thank you all for sharing out with one another, because I think our main goal here is having families, share your experiences and what's been helpful.
I love that. There's also like bringing that expectation that's already like helping with regulation of like, when is school gonna start? So like getting ready for that transition is so important.
And I just wanted to highlight, because I think sometimes a question that I get, and I know y'all gets also about co-regulation, is like, isn't our goal, how does this relate to self-regulation, right? Like, how do we build from co-regulating, from modeling to building some of those skills to access internally? And I love this visual because it talks about how we need all of these things, and like co-regulation is the network that's actually really is foundational to building self-regulation. So again, if we think about, we really need all three of these things that are a part of co-regulation to build self-regulation skills, right? So it's not just skills coaching. Skills coaching is an important piece of it, right? We're modeling, we're teaching, we're practicing, we're thinking with our child, how did this work? How does your body feel after? But there's also two other really key components of this developmentally that can help with that self-regulation, both for youth and in adulthood as well, which is one, having those warm, supportive, nurturing relationships, and then creating those supportive environments. So if we think about kind of that visual y'all just showed at the beginning of the 3 overlapping circles, what's really powerful about this is co-regulation isn't a substitute for self-regulation. It's really foundational for building these skills across development. And again, as y'all and I will keep saying this because I think we think it's really important, there's not a cutoff. There's no magical age or time when it's like, okay, well, now it should all be self-regulation for the individual and no co-regulation. Because again, as adults, we all need co-regulation sometimes. But I think what's important is by having this built in, it creates that foundation to start to help an individual practice applying some of these skills in real time independently.
Yeah, I think like an example of I just needed co-regulation yesterday because I was trying to make a big decision and I was feeling already really nervous about it. And so like I just called my sister and talked through it and got over it, and she kind of like calmed me down about it. And so it's always happening all the time.
Right. So if we think about, how do we start to build self-regulation, right? How do we start to help our kids that we are supporting like build some of these skills, right? So I think reducing verbal input not only is really regulating, it actually also can help with developing self-regulation. So there's not an overly dependence on the adults prompting, right? And saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. Visuals can be really, really helpful. I love this mindful morning visual of a strategy, which is, take 5 deep breaths, list 4 things that you can see around you, 3 things you're grateful for, 2 self-talk, 1 thing you're looking forward to. So you can imagine visuals again can look really different. But the nice thing about visuals is it's a non-language based, it's not verbal input in the sense that someone is speaking, can help remind an individual, of how to access some of those skills. And I think visuals should be co-created. So your child should be involved with them. If we're creating a calming card, maybe for little ones, we're drawing a picture of a place that makes them feel really calm. For older kids, it might be more of like a script or a checklist of things they can try, but really involving them. I also think co-regulating with multiple caregivers can be really helpful in building self-regulation. So thinking about how can others in the child's life also support co-regulation. So it's not always one person doing the co-regulating. Again, different families are going to look differently, but and this is also where collaborating with your school team can come in. So your school social worker, guidance counselor, your students' teachers will often have ideas and will have seen things in the classroom that can be effective at co-regulating. I also want to encourage you all are advocates for your kids. You probably have really good things that work at home that your teachers and social workers would love to hear about. So having that dialogue around how can we support one another and being consistent in how we're supporting the child in co-regulation. If you are working on a regulating skill, if you're working on deep breathing, if you're working on stretching, you're working on the idea of how do we take a pause, you always want to practice when you're calm. Again, when a child's already starting to rumble or at the peak, we cannot learn a new skill. But we can practice regulation strategies. It's actually best to start when you're calm. If nighttime is a calming time, maybe that's a time where we practice, doing something related to mindfulness or doing a stretch or doing a couple deep breaths, because that's going to help build the skill and help it help an individual be more confident and comfortable accessing it in the moment. And I think in line with that, really sticking with what you know can really help with self-regulation. So if we're trying to do different things every time we're co-regulating, it can be kind of disorienting for the child. So we really want to think about what are one or two things that work that we can model, and then continue to like encourage and help an individual reflect on over time.
Yeah, because it's so confusing also when we're trying to pull a lot of different strategies. We always have this conversation with teachers, because like, in that moment again, like trying to check in with yourself first, because when we are feeling that overwhelm from someone's dysregulation, then we want to like jump into coming up with creative strategies to make the situation calm, but just so important to consistently use what you have tried, and that's just like the way to help that child, that person learn that eventually and self-regulate.
So I think we wanted to conclude, and then we will do some Q&A, but just to have everyone kind of reflect for a minute, and if you're comfortable, share out in the chat, like, what do you want to take away from this discussion on co-regulation? We started the talk with kind of a range of experiences of exposure to the term, what it is, like thinking about what is one thing you want to take away, or one thing that resonated with you, something you want to apply from this discussion. So kind of thinking, it sounds like co-regulation to self-regulation and how to do it. Yep. So thinking about how do we build from that place. Starting with yourself, create a habit of self-regulation to access when needed. I love that, right? Like creating, right? And all these things we talked about, like what I just said of sticking with what you know, practicing when calm, really good for the adults as well. Oh, how to talk through as parents and agree on the best ways to offer co-regulation. That's a great point. And I will say, like, it might look a little different from parent to parent. Yep. So thinking about how do we want to be consistent in how we're responding, I think that's a great takeaway.
One of my takeaways is that just reminding myself as an advocate, but also just like thinking about how can we advocate for the neurodivergent people with creating that relationship with others, not just us, like that you just talked about, just creating that, like if it's within the family, within the siblings, not just one person being the one that is co-regulating. The teachers, it's so important. And it's just about that community, it's about that support system.
Yeah.
Supporting.
Oh, and I see a comment in the chat for a suggestion for a future talk or discussion point of like supporting parents or getting them on the same page with each other.
That's very true. Divorce rates very high for parents of kids.
Oh, and I see helpful and validating. Some things we've been doing have been trial and error so far. Yes. Right? Like again, it is not one size fits all. And I did see a question in the Q&A about, so I'll just it says, do you recommend resources for family therapy or individual therapy or smaller group workshops? Is there anything to keep in mind when looking for family therapists to make sure their approach is aligned with Nest strategies? So I think I can speak a couple of things. So Nest is not offering any smaller group workshops. Usually when individuals are looking for family therapy or individual therapy or parenting support, which, you know, I'm a complete advocate for, not just because that is also my job, but I think it can be really helpful to have that safe space and to think through some of these things. Yeah, IFS CBT. Yep. So so Elisa was putting in the chat, like, some different kinds of models of therapy. I think when you're, you know, the question, and then I see a question about encouraging therapy if they don't want to go. So in terms of evaluating therapists, right, it really comes down to fit with your family. I usually recommend families kind of go through their insurance and see who might be available in their area. And in terms of aligned with Nest strategies, like often as you're getting to know a therapist, one, I think it's really valid and important, and I want to empower you to ask questions, like ask them what's their experience working with autistic individuals, right? What's their experience working with kids or with families? You can ask them kind of what is their treatment philosophy?
What happens if the kid is not motivated to go to psychotherapy?
Yeah. So I'll get to that one in a second. But in terms of looking for family therapies are aligned with Nest practices, I think you can also share a little bit about like, here are the kinds of things my child is experiencing. What do you think about that? So I think it can be a dialogue as you're starting to get to know the therapist, and asking them about their experience, asking them about what their approach is, right? And then from what they're telling you, thinking about, does that align with my family's values? And does that align with, you know, some of the things I've been looking for? So that's like a very big picture. If a child does not want to go to therapy, I think this is a really important question, because I think for therapy to be beneficial, the child needs to want, anyone needs to want to be there, right? Like, you know, I think it's important that there's some connection to a child's goals, and also understanding of what therapy is. I feel like I could do a whole talk on this, and it's obviously individualized, but the things I would think about are, one, how is it being framed? I think sometimes kids hear about therapy and they think it means there's something wrong with them, or that it's a punishment, or and so framing it as, you know, this is a support space. This is someone whose job it is to help make things better for you. I think for younger kids where there's often parent involvement, it'd be helpful for parents to say, I'm going to go and learn ways to better support you. And I think that's also always an option, is that parents can go to learn strategies and skills for how to support their child, if their child is not feeling, you know, like they're in a place or ready for it, or wanting to engage in it. I also think there are ways, as if you identify a provider, there are ways that the provider can get to know the child, and connect with their interests.
Yeah, like I feel like I want to add to this by saying that oftentimes that anxiety also comes from not knowing what situation you'll be in. I mean, obviously they don't know the person, but at the same time also the place they're going to. So trying to offer some options or something that they can also have an input so that they feel in control of the situation. Maybe it's through, like, it can be through not just physically going, but like there's also like options of maybe recording voice or having a phone call or writing to a therapist or something like that. So like giving those options that might not just be like one way to do it. I mean, depending on what they're offering, right, Michelle?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think also thinking about what is the goal, and like depending on what is the goal and what might the child's goals be, and how can we align with that as well, because we want them to be a voice for themselves also. I also see another question in the Q&A. What about when a child becomes dysregulated nearly every time they are asked to do anything at home? So Yalda, I don't know if you have thoughts on this to start, this kind of question of like, what about when it feels like the dysregulation is like always just around the corner or related to a request?
Yeah, I would again talk about that control and predictability, and oftentimes, like what I mean, I only see kids in school, but this happens a lot, you know, and it comes from a certain anxiety around that. So like whatever it is asked of them to do, and at the same time also just not having that control, you know. And this just recently, like I was in a school where a student was really refusing to do anything, and this refusal is not sort of non-compliance in a way that like I want to non-comply. Like I don't look at it like that, and I actually am like very much against compliance-based practices anyway, but just saying that, and there's a difference between you have to do it or this is compliance-based, and there is a structure expectation of something, and these two are completely different. So just unpacking that. But I feel like thinking about what is causing that, you know, and like having a conversation about that, unpacking that with a child. And that happens a lot of times, like it comes out, that anxiety comes out by saying no right away, but there's more to that.
Yeah, I think about kind of getting curious about what, and we didn't talk about this as much in this talk, like, you know, what might be dysregulating about this particular request or about this series of requests. Sometimes I think about regulation and timing, like does there need to be like a break right when they get home from school? Is there a way to shift kind of when the requests are happening? Is there a way to think about what's being requested and maybe make it kind of smaller, chunk it into more manageable components? Because all of that can contribute to like the regulation. Are we thinking about, are there other rumbling signs that are coming up that we might be able to notice and potentially redirect or support before asking to do something? And then as you start to get some of that information, that's where it can come back to some of these routines or previewing of kind of what is going to happen when we get home.
Right.
You know, here's how I can help you be regulated or help you build this skill. I find that sometimes, not always, there's that dysregulation around a request comes from not being sure actually what to do or how to do it.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that. And also like saying that I don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Having access to that process of how to do it, you know. So yeah, it really depends on also what it is, right? And the question is, how do I, did you get to that? I don't remember. How do I get the child to go beyond doing the minimum? Kind of goes into the same.
Yes, it goes into that. I wasn't sure if that was in the context of therapy or separate, but I think it's really kind of the same thing of like, are there skills that we can build? Is there some regulation that needs to take place like during an activity to help them feel more re-regulated so they can access more than going beyond the minimum? But I think I would want to take a step back and think about, you know, ideally think with the child, like think as the adult, but then also maybe explore with the child in a calm moment, like what's happening for them. Oh, my kiddos get dysregulated when asked to do routine chores at times. Yeah. And I think that, again, like I know I don't know people's specific children or experiences. I think that reminds me sometimes of this idea of like the reserves battery, where maybe sometimes those chores feel totally manageable, and sometimes like you've had a day, like I'm thinking for myself, like I try to do the dishes every day. There are days when I get home and the idea of doing a dish seems like insurmountable to me. Like I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I've got 3 other things going on. I think the same thing can happen for our kids, where maybe there might be other things happening in the background that we don't realize. that can lead to dysregulation. Or maybe they were like in the middle of like their most important part of the game, like that to them was like so critical, and now they're being asked to do this routine chores. And so I think that's where we can switch into that co-regulation mode and think about, okay, maybe this request to do the chore needs to be paused for a little bit so we can help re-regulate and then come back to it, or think about, okay, I wonder if something else was happening that's making this really hard in the moment. And that's not to say that kids shouldn't, I want to be clear, like it's not to say that kids shouldn't do chores and we want to build these routines. It's thinking about kind of that snapshot of what else might be happening for them that's getting in the way of doing this routine experience.
Exactly. It goes back to also the environment feeling safe, right? So it's what is about this routine right now that's causing them not wanting to do it. So like maybe it is a way of not having any control. Maybe they're not feeling successful in having control over their environment and feeling safe. So they're saying no to that, because again, it's back to like complying to doing something rather than actually doing it to help regulate. And routines are really a way to facilitate with regulation. We use them so that we can actually, with our executive functioning, as we talked about in our last session. So a lot of it is to actually help with feeling calm and knowing what to do. And when it becomes something that's like you must do, and it's more of that compliance, then it might become then difficult to create that safe space. What I'm trying to say.
And I think we're about at 7:30. Yalda and I can stay on for the next couple of minutes. Oh, I see a non-preferred task takes much longer to do, needs a lot of lead up time
Right.
to get things done. Yeah. So building in that, like, okay, like that kind of coping ahead of this is going to take longer. You know, how can I check in with myself? Because I know I'm going into something where my child may need extra support to complete this task. And maybe build in some extra time for that particular task, or think about, are there ways to kind of break it down? If we're starting to see that rumbling, can we adjust the demand and think about, okay, like maybe you can start the chore and then I can help you as well. I think just validating that other parents have had similar experiences around some of these things at home. Oh, it says we couldn't see the chat. I apologize that individuals couldn't see the chat. We did read out, I think for the most part. We'll try to fix it before our next one so that everyone should be able to see one another's comments as well. Thank you all so much for being here, for being willing to think about this topic, share together. Yalda will send a follow-up email with a recording of the talk, and some additional resources as well. But thank you all for being here tonight. We wish you all a wonderful holiday and break time as well.
Yeah, so I am definitely going to send some resources in the next newsletter, as well as the handout of the slides in a PDF form. And yeah, you know how it goes. There was a question I kind of want to quickly address. Is that okay, Michelle?
Yeah, of course.
How do I make the chore order psychotherapy to look like a reward? So, I mean, I just want to say this, that it shouldn't be really a reward. And that's how I would approach this, because it should be intrinsically something that someone wants to do. So like trying to think of it more as like, if you mean by reward as a place that's a pleasurable place to go to, then that makes sense. So thinking of it as like a nice place to go to, and that can be, what do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, and I see Helen said go somewhere special afterwards to eat, right? So there might be, I think there's two different things, right? There's ways to recognize the effort and kind of reward our kids and ourselves when we've done challenging things. I think that the question of how do we build intrinsic motivation is a really complex one. And I think it, to Yalda's point, it's really about, exploring and really starting with the child of what is going to help them feel connected and successful. And that's going to in turn build that motivation. So I think there's not a quick substitute of like, how do we make this thing that's not so motivating in and of itself feel motivating, but I think we can build over time. Also reflecting to the child that you see, like I'm thinking more with chores, for example, like their effort and responsibility and what they're contributing to the family as well. But I think it's often a long journey across development for all of us to think about what is going to be like, what our values are and what's most intrinsically motivating for us. And yes, we will send the slides in a PDF form after the presentation as well. And yes, I am a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist.
Thank you so much for the engagement. I feel like I learned a lot from some of the strategies at home. It was really sweet.
Yes.
To just know, like someone said, offering my bed. That was really nice.
Oh, the link to the recording will also be shared out in an email. So you'll have the recording, you'll have the PDF, and then some additional, I think Yalda had also gathered just some additional resources and articles about co-regulation for you to explore at your leisure.